Kandeh YUMKELLA is a man on a mission. For harmony in the world of peace and security, we need to give access to people who have no access to electricity. Relying on biomass, firewood, cow dung to cook, it's causing 2 million deaths a year, much more than malaria or HIV/AIDS. Energy is the golden thread that runs across all the pillars of sustainable development. Africa is a rich continent. Its flora and fauna, its people, its resources. But Africa does have its challenges. Infrastructure, security, energy. Energy is the golden thread that runs across all the pillars of sustainable development. This last item is the concern of Kandeh YUMKELLA, man of energy. Without sustainable energy, you can't have sustainable growth. Kandeh YUMKELLA is a man on a mission. He wants everyone in Africa to enjoy access to clean and affordable energy, whether they live in rural Rwanda or his own home village on Sierra Leone's north coast. With access to energy, YUMKELLA hopes that people can enjoy the same success in life as he has. A career that has put him at a major American university, his own country's government, and in important positions with the United Nations. For harmony in the world, for peace and security, we need to give access to the 1.4 billion people who have no access to electricity. We need to help the 2.7 billion who are relying on biomass for cooking in the 21st century. That's what, about 1/3 of mankind relying on biomass, firewood, cow dung, and it's causing 2 million deaths a year, much more than malaria or HIV/AIDS. And some of them are literally either my aunt or my sister. Recently, Kandeh went home to his village in Kichon, in the far northeast. That's my brother. That's my uncle. And that's my chief. Also my uncle. Yeah. It is a sign how much the people of this fishing village revere the boy who grew up to become a respected academic, government minister, and then head of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. YUMKELLA's home village remains his inspiration. By staying in touch with his family and the people here, YUMKELLA.
So I'm going to come to you.
He can have with
okay.
And just how much there is still to do.
Welcome, welcome. It's a pleasure to have the man that we're basically talking about, Dr. Honorable YUMKELLA, an African icon, a global player, somebody who left the comfort of the Western world to go back home, again into Africa, to see how he can contribute to the development of Africa, not just only his country, but across many nations on the African continent. And there's no better time as well to have such a personality than now, when the whole world, not just Africa, is wondering what they're going to do during the coronavirus, And suddenly, within the same period of COVID-19, something trending all around the world, something called the Black Lives Matter. And of course, this then is a person that has been fighting for the lives of ordinary Africans for the last decades. Nevertheless, he decided to wash the comfort of where he was in the Western world, in Europe, and now got back home on the African continent and continue with the same passion, enthusiasm, strength, and energy to see what he can continue to do for the people of Africa. Once again, it's indeed my pleasure to have right with us Dr. Honorable Kandeh YUMKELLA, the man of the moment. You're welcome to this wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Honorable Dr. YUMKELLA, you saw a little bit of an intro courtesy of CCTV, which have done a wonderful documentary on you some years ago. And so all the credit of that footage is to CCTV. And here we are, and based on what you have seen, you are a modern day man and an African. You have shown us in the footage. My simple question to start with this conversation is, based on where you were before in the comfort zone, and again, still in the comfort zone as an African, what gave you the impression to go back to Africa?
Thank you for having me. When I saw that footage, there was a lot of nostalgia there. You took me back almost a decade during my days in the global scene and in a wonderful city of Vienna. And indeed, I gave all of that up to come home. It is for a number of reasons. One, the realization indeed that only we Africans can transform our continent. We can have partnerships with the global community. We can tap into global knowledge systems, but the real heavy lifting has to be done by us. And part of that includes having the right political leadership and decision-making to really push for transformative change. The second reason is that I got really, in a way, inside myself, tormented and angry that whenever in all these big development cooperation meetings or global issues, global governance issues, discussions that I would be involved in, whether it is at the UN, the World Bank, think tanks, or World Economic Forum, when I look at statistics, on a number of development statistics, Africa is always at the bottom. So you can say part of it was an angry inner feeling that, hey, why are we always at the bottom? Maybe one could also be part of the solution. But the third, most important reason is what I explained to people is the possibilities I saw. I had been to other places that were quote unquote referred to as basket cases. Vietnam, Cambodia, you know, other places that I had seen in Asia. I've been to places in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I've been to factories there, and I could see these countries manufacturing products and exporting to markets in the OECD countries. In other words, the more industrialized countries. They will meet the specifications. They had the right technology, the right management. And I'm saying, wait a minute. When I was a student, these locations were referred to as basket cases. But hey, in terms of economic development, they've transformed, they're producing products, they're managing technology, they're able to service developed countries. In one case, Cambodia, once Pascal Lamy, who was head of WTO, and myself, we hosted a conference there for African ministers of industry and others. And that year, they became self-sufficient in rice production. And I say, wait a minute, if Cambodia can not only be self-sufficient in rice production, they also have factories that are producing products, garments, and other products of the Western world, and they had dictators like Pol Pot, then there is a possibility that Africa can change. But if I come home to Africa, there were also positive examples. I saw change in Ghana. I saw changes happening in Kenya and Nigeria on digital technology. These guys setting up knowledge ecosystems for IT. And then Rwanda. I said, wait a minute. We have even homegrown examples where countries have had problems, conflict, and so on, even on our continent, they're transforming. Maybe I can be part of the catalyst to make that happen in my country, but also across Africa, at least in my country, but maybe across Africa. So maybe I ought to come home. It was a risky move, but yes, I've been here now 5 years. It's been very, very, I underline, very, very tough, but even still exciting as well, because in the process, I'm learning. I'm learning about what goes wrong. I'm learning about some areas where you can make change. I'm learning also about issues that I myself had underestimated, like ethnic identity in politics, the depth of corruption and how corruption can stifle everything else that you want to do. So it's been exciting. It's been a learning experience. Now I'm in Parliament. The clip you just saw, that was my village. Now I represent them in Parliament. So I have had the challenge as well of moving from 40,000 feet where you're talking strategy, technology, competitiveness. Now I have to explain some things in my local language for people who are illiterate. So for me, again, as a student of development, I'm learning 24/7 the realities of African governance. And now we are faced with COVID-19 as well. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much with this wonderful explanation. Now, one question again that comes out from here is, when you told people 5 years or 6 years ago that you're thinking of maybe going back to Africa, and not just going back on appointment, but going back to contest or to go into politics in terms of leadership, what was the reaction?
The majority of my close friends told me I was crazy. And for a good number of them, they believed that their worries were all confirmed with the way I was received in politics and my experiences. For the diehard Pan-Africanists and those who are diehard Afro-optimists, they say, we are happy you went through the crucible and they're still dumping on you. But the fact that you are there, we believe, is a success because you survived. And we are happy you did it because you have still not left, which everybody predicted that after you're roughed up a little bit, you'll run back to the comforts of the Western world. So my friends are still divided. Now, on a broader scale, part of the global governance architecture, World Bank, UN, think tanks, they are happy that I have been here and gone through some of these experiences. And now I spend a lot of time in Zoom calls and international discussions on a range of issues now. And people call on me because, hey, they say, Kandeh, now you're leaving it. Now you leave poverty, because my constituency is one of the poorest in the country. My country is amongst the top 3 or 4 in the world that is most vulnerable to climate change. We are amongst the 5 poorest in the world, but it's also a resource-rich countries. We're one of the countries with the highest deforestation rates. So people are saying, hey, Kandeh, now we need you even more because you're talking to us from Sierra Leone. So some are really excited, the think tanks, Rocky Mountain Institute, the WHO, UN DESA, this is the Department for Economic and Social Affairs, World Bank, IMF Parliamentary Forum, IRENA in Dubai. They say, we're very happy when we have calls with you and you say, hey, I'm talking to you from my vehicle, I'm heading for my constituency or the border area with Guinea to sensitize them on COVID-19. They say, that's raw, that's real. We're happy. So it's a mixed bag, but all in all, from what I tell you, when I look back, maybe I would have done the same thing, but probably a few things would have been different. But I have no regrets coming home right now. It's tough, but I have no regrets coming home.
Excellent. Well, at least that would be a motivation for other people watching this to know, not just living in the diaspora, when you have your expertise and you're ready to go through the challenges back home, you still have the opportunity of rendering service to the international organization.
Well, yes, and I hope people can see that, and that is part of the challenge for those who want to go into politics. People expect that when you go into politics, that should be the whole life you have. In fact, in some cases, again, let me put it in the context that I'm talking from my personal experience in Sierra Leone. In some cases, people would want you to even apologize for being a professional because they tell you that you are not a typical politician. You are not a good politician. And quote unquote, what that means is you've not adapted to the local condition. And I have told them very clear that I spent over 20 years studying to be a professional. I spent almost 3 decades working as a professional in places that have transformed, where systems work and structures work, institutions dominate rather than personalities, that I refuse to change some aspects of my life, because if I totally conform, that means society has changed me to the normal bad governance institutions we have here. So I have resisted that. At the same time, I have to learn how to speak the local lingo properly, how I can translate competitiveness in a local context. The whole thing you and I talk about, transformation. How can I explain what I mean by transformation and not just change? Because change in politics in Africa means many times change the driver, but leave the engine. The engine is the whole kleptocratic machinery that is holding people back. And when I saw Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe movement, and I say what is making Africans not breathe is the corruption on their necks. And it's not just cash corruption, it's the corruption of institutions of all sorts, and the lack of that effective institutional governance, so that people can work within systems. And in this definition, institutions are not just the physical infrastructure. It is the values, the norms, and the processes, and the rules of the game that we define, whether it's in corporate governance or political governance or our social lives and our values, that will value hard work, will value those who show excellence in what they do. We will not celebrate the super corrupt. So it's a balancing act for anybody who wants to come to say, look, demonstrate to the youth that you can be a politician, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be an energy expert or sustainability expert, that suddenly you've come and everything you did in the Western world, you have to leave, apologize for it, and now be local. No, I refuse to do that.
Amazing transformation indeed, as you call it, transformation, and people are hardworking. Now, of course, this is the combination of the decades of your experience, and now wearing the tag of a politician, and you've been at home now for almost 5 years. What would be a key something that you remember over the last 5 years that give you the more encouragement to say, definitely this place needs you more than ever?
I guess one of the primary things that I would cite or experience is how much inertia there is in the system to remain the same. Remember, I talked about a machinery of governance that has a whole political economy around it. And in a number of cases, 2 key characteristics: patronage, kleptocracy. Patronage means people get into governance and they have to become super wealthy to feed the beast. Yeah, that patronage system, therefore, builds a whole set of followers who like the system to remain the same, so they can have leakages from the system. Leakages can be through corruption or some other means, so they can enjoy and survive. So some people then say change means keep the machinery the same. Our people will come. I think PLO Lumumba talks about it, that the other people were bad. As long as these are my people, they're doing the same, they're not bad. The same means that patronage machinery that causes the leakages from development and transformation. The kleptocracy reality here is, and this is not only politicians, people think it is politicians. Let me tell you, very quickly you realize that there is a group of individuals who many times control nations, and they survive every regime that comes, and they're super wealthy. And that system continues to make them wealthy. Therefore, any system that pushes transparency, probity, good governance, accountability becomes a danger. And therefore, that machinery kicks in very quickly to say, no, XYZ cannot move into governance because they will push for changes that will reduce the rent-seeking, what we call in economics, rent-seeking machinery. And that kleptocracy where people become super millionaires. So for me, the reality therefore is how much we talk about change, but then we realize systems remain the same. The actors changed, but the system remained the same, yeah? And so you don't see the tangible impact. You see some of the same practices. You say, but wait a minute, when you were campaigning, you talked about against this. And then you see these individuals justifying that system because of the whole political economy around it. So for me, that has been major. The second one is identity politics. And some of your Nigerian professors and others, I remember one at Oxford University, he did a lot of writings on identity politics. In Africa, that could be, in most cases, ethnic or regional politics. And I tell you, when you combine ethnic politics, ethnic identity politics with illiteracy, it's a potent resistance to change. It is, and very clever politicians use it well and they self-perpetuate. So they survive systems because they can mobilize that ethnic base, and that ethnic base does not care if they are stealing money or what they're doing, or they don't know anything. As long as XYZ is from our own group, has that identity, we vote him in. We don't care what he does. Everything he says is good. In a few circumstances, not in our context in Sierra Leone, but in other cases, it could be religious, it could be ethno-religious, it could be ethno-regional as well.
We're still talking to Honorary Dr. YUMKELLA, who is here with us all the way, sharing his view, his ideology so far on what it has been for him in home, going back home, and then becoming a candidate and then getting elected into the government. And there, right now, he's been back home for the last 5 years, working and doing something. And of course, he just mentioned some point, basically, in terms of the last word he was talking about is religion or ethnic identity politics, whereby ethnicity tend to come into picture of what it is that he's talking about and what we tend to go through in Africa. And in the look of things, definitely, I think we definitely have a long way to go. What do I mean by that? Because if we're not able to differentiate merits from the quality of our people that are at home, that are standing for election, then we still have a long way to go in trying to find the right candidate and the right people. While I'm waiting for Honorable YUMKELLA to probably unmute your mic, the question that comes to mind now based on that presentation is, how then will the system be able to deal with the so-called people in tag of the kleptocracy and this powerful people? Is it by putting a stronger law into the system? And based on what you have seen over there where you are, what then are you doing to strengthen and probably share this wisdom with them? And are they listening?
Are they listening? That's a good one. Well, I tell you, you need many more people to speak out about the possibilities in Africa. I want to put it positively. We need to better articulate the benefits society can have based on having good governance. We have to show not examples from other continents, but examples from Africa. We do that a lot here. In my advocacy here or debates on TV or elsewhere, I give Ghana as an example. Why Ghana? Because when I was in university here in Sierra Leone in the late 70s and in high school in the mid 70s, Ghanaians were here. Ghanaian professionals teaching in our schools, doing all kinds of work. Ghanaian fishermen and so on. They will buy supplies from here. You saw the same thing in Nigeria. They'll buy supplies and put it in the Ghana Must Go bags, soap, all kinds of stuff, take it back. If they have a bar of soap, they cut it into slices so that one bar can last for long. So I always tell them that my generation saw that, and my generation has seen Ghana where it is today. So at least people could relate that, yes, we remember when things were bad in Ghana. We give examples of, so basic, Rwanda is another one. And what I started saying at the beginning, I talked to the young generation about the digital economy and digitalization, that is their future. My generation will only play with it, but their generation, they got to be IT savvy. They got to tap into the digital economy. And to help them understand that, I talk about Silicon Savannah in Kenya. I talk about digitalization and ecosystem development in Nigeria and Ghana. Recently, I brought a group here last year, actually, from Ghana, World Reader, that was created by the former CEO of Amazon, but he started the pilot in Ghana. So you have Ghana authors now putting their books and so on tablets for kids to use in schools and libraries. And Ghana has been a hub to spread that, writing programs and so on, and spreading it across the continent. So I give them those examples to show them possibilities, because in my country with 70% illiteracy, unless you make the examples vivid, even though it's tough for them to appreciate that change is possible. But it's still a struggle. What else we can do? We have to keep engaging the young people. That is the hope I have now, that with 60, 70% of African populations below 35 years, and the projections are 30% of those below 25 by 2050, maybe even 40% will be in our continent. I try to give them this picture of hope and possibility in the future. So I call it hope, opportunity, and transformation. I give them hope. I show the opportunities that are there, and then I try to persuade them about transformation. Then I say, all of this will not happen. It will just be a dream if you don't have the right leadership, the right value systems, and institutions that work. Finally, with the bigger politicians, of course, some dismiss it as academic. I try to say to them, look, our populations might double in the next 20, 30 years, 1.4 billion people soon, and 2.2 billion by 2050. And I say, look, the demographics as transformation is so high. The deterioration of our ecosystems is also high, that you're going to have unemployed youth, semi-illiterate, packing into our cities, and they're going to come after all of us in our old age, just to get them to be scared. And I can give them real statistics. Sierra Leone, over 60% youth unemployment rates. Yeah, that is scary. If nobody is scared, I am scared. But those numbers, you can also see in some other African countries. Yet you look at the macroeconomics, 75% of the budget in our country goes into wages and debt servicing. In Zambia, it's about 80% too. So I said to them, look, if you don't manage the economy well, it is not growing, and you're spending money just hiring people in the civil service, instead of encouraging entrepreneurship and supply chain development and innovation, there's going to be a time you can't do anything else. You can't finance your hospitals. You can't finance development because you're spending all the money on paying wages. Because again, we just have to hire. I mean, people tell you, oh, well, it's after the elections, we have to hire our own people. But hey, you don't have the budget. If you tie up your revenues, 80% of your revenues, just covering overhead, what is left for health, for education, for agribusiness, and for building the infrastructure, physical and institutional that you need to really transform your economy, you're in trouble. So I guess you give hope, but for the leadership, you scare the hell out of them. If they're not afraid of their own situation, I tell you, nothing will change unless it is put in terms that these kids will chase you out one day, and you can't fool them all the time.
So at least the word says so. Now, you know, you mentioned digital economy, and question would be, has Africa got enough resources to take care of those identifiable crises or challenges that you just mentioned? Do they have enough resources not to depend on the Western world to say, give us money, we need to do this? Can they, from their own resources, provide the services and get the money? Do we have the vision?
Well, let me put it this way. No nation can have all the resources they need. That's why you need foreign direct investment to come in. I guess what you're referring to in the case of Africa is what I have called that receivership mentality, that we have to wait for donor aid and they have to tell us how to change. We are helpless, we have to wait till they come. That is the notion some of us are challenging, to say, no, some of our African countries are super rich, very rich, with minerals and other products and natural resources. 60% of the arable land is still in our continent. Let me tell you, even when we talk about, you know, I've spent more time now, almost 2.5 decades, dealing with energy systems. And all around the world, including today and yesterday and the day before, I'm on Zoom calls with institutions just talking about energy transitions in Africa. Let me tell you something. The whole world wants to drive towards greener energy, renewables. The minerals you need to make that transformation occur in all over the world, the bulk of them are in Africa. Nickel, magnesium, the platinum group of metals, the bulk of them are in Africa. Manganese. So you look at where the world wants to be by 2050 to lower emissions. It is not going to happen if those platinum group of metals and manganese and other products, cobalt, for example, if Africa is not a player there. The question for Africa is, do you want to be the innovator? Do you want to go to Elon Musk as a group of African countries to say, hey, we know you're investing over $5 billion in the new battery systems. Well, guess what? Zambia and Congo and their neighborhood, they're sitting on some of the largest deposits of manganese. Why don't you build some of your factories there? Then you visit the South Africans and their neighbors to say, hey guys, we know you're sitting on the bulk of the platinum group of metals. We want to talk to you about hydrogen energy. The discussion today is about renewable hydrogen, meaning using renewable energy to generate hydrogen energy that can be in fuel cells that become the energy of the future. And many people are saying that's where we want to be in 2050. My brother, I'm drafting an article on that. That's what we want to be talking about. Africa leading this revolution using our resources. So I gave you a long answer to say, in terms of natural resources, we can be part of global supply chains and innovation that will make us super rich, and we can deal with our health and education problems. But some others have oil and gas. Yeah, gas has to be part of the transformation. Well, even in my village, they just did a geophysical survey. And we are hearing that maybe in my constituency, we have gas. I say, you know, my father used to say he thinks that we look like a place that should have oil because it looks like the Nigerian Niger Delta. So maybe it is true, but I can tell you that 30% of the new discoveries of oil and gas in the last 15 years were in Africa. Yes, we are not as poor as we think. Senegal, huge deposits now found very recently. But again, you need regional cooperation to meet our energy needs. We need to look at regional markets as well, regional energy trade, and some of that infrastructure in terms of negotiations and agreement have been done in ECOWAS, in COMESA, in SADC. Where we lack now is the political will to make deals, what I call energy and political deals, for the Nigerian and the Ghanaian to sit together with the Ivorian to say, look, we're the three giants in West Africa. Nigeria, you have so much gas, you can supply us gas, we can supply you hydropower. But collectively, we can sell energy now with transmission systems to Togo, Benin, and to Sierra Leone and others that are too small. But guess what? Our market can be like the EU, 300 or 350 million of us. Ghana is already a big cook. Ghana, I give you another resource issue. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are probably 50, 60% of cocoa. Does anybody need to tell us that we can compete with the chocolate producers of the world? I saw that in Malaysia already 10 years ago. I went there and they were launching this special brand of Malaysian chocolate. And I asked the Prime Minister at that time, do you mean you competed with us for oil palm? Now you're going to buy our cocoa as well and compete? He said, no, now we don't need to grow cocoa. We just need to get the supplies. We can make chocolates. Now that is not rocket science. So yes, I can see a good cooperation, and they share a border between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana to be the key chocolate producers of the world. And they have other means to do it and other resources.
Honorable, why so far? You been on the outside before, been the DG of the UNIDO, and then advising them in some of this power energy you're talking about then, and now again being part of and parcel of the system. How many of you do you think are needed before Africa begin to really galvanize and start generating what's needed?
I can tell you the good news is I hear some of those conversations. But you just need, again, that's why I talk about deal making. You know, we try to do what we call the energy leaders group, to have politicians, but businessmen. And it is good for Africa that we have some billionaires. That's what I tell people. We have credible individuals that can borrow money from capital markets overseas. And I hear people worried about that. Come on. The countries I see in Asia are borrowing money, but they borrow money for production, not for consumption. Yeah, can you still hear me?
Yes,
you see, we have a second power outage in less than 30 minutes. So you see why I keep talking energy.
We can hear you.
But my point is, I see that we just need to create the right platforms, and I am a strong advocate for this public-private platform for dialogue. So businessmen can tell governments that here is the kind of institutions we need to see so we locally can invest, but others outside can invest. And people should not be scared. We are educated enough to structure deals to suit our interests. You know, I hear all these conspiracy theories about Africans being exploited, and I say, but who signs the contracts? Africans do. I go to Asia, they're signing deals every day, infrastructure deals. They're signing technology deals. They're signing natural resource deals, but they structure it to benefit their people. They know exactly where that revenue will go so that they can create another productive sector. And there are all these studies about about Malaysia, Taiwan, and others. Some of them have not followed the natural path that comparative advantage will dictate. They've created competitive advantage using one resource, one sudden injection of revenue to create skills, capacity, research, to move into another level of technology or another advanced product. We can learn, we can do the same. Labor-intensive manufacturing, new technologies in energy, the digital platform, these young people. I dream of the day where we are the people who are writing the programs for other parts of the world because we're cheaper. Remember, the Indians, Azim Premji and others, the billionaire Azim Premji, they started creating those call centers 30, 40 years ago. I remember I did a keynote for XLRI, one of their leading business schools 14 years ago in Jamshedpur, and he was being honored. And he was talking about the story, how they created those call centers. Those days in India, teaching kids basic IT or just receiving calls from overseas to do bills. Now they advance. They want to go into microchip. Well, who says Africa cannot be the next hub for digitalization, writing, programming? And I see Nigerians, Ghanaians, Kenyans, Rwandans moving into that space. That's the way we should be thinking. A South African friend of mine says, as he's a businessman, he does SME incubators, supporting small and medium enterprises to grow. He says, Kandeh, Africans have to learn to ride waves. There is a green energy wave. We have to ride it like the Asians do. We should be the solar panel assemblers. We should be the producers of the batteries for them. So we jump ahead of everybody else. We should be the programmers for the new smart grids that the world needs in Europe and elsewhere. So again, I come back to my message of hope and opportunity, not just the dismal disease, death, and disaster. No, I see these possibilities. And I say, my God, you need many more of us to begin to convince these young people that, yes, they can be Bill Gates, they can be the next Mo Ibrahim, they can be the next Elon Musk. When he launched the capsule into orbit a couple of weeks ago, and they said it was the first in a decade, I said to a friend of mine, I said, you see what the Americans did? They took their time. But who did it? A private sector innovator. He's not only in the rocket space, he's now the guy challenging the automobile industry. We call it disruptive technologies and business model. Now he wants to create cities that run only on batteries using the sun. And he's going to do it. Everybody knows when Elon Musk says, I'll do it, he'll take his time. He launched people now into space. Now, yes, this is his other dream he's had for 15 years. What is he doing? He wants to invest $5 billion in making batteries. And I was saying, hey, guys, create the enabling environment, the right transparency, good governance, that this guy says, look, I'll put my factories now in Congo and in Zambia and in South Africa. So we make the batteries there. But you know something? Maybe the Kenyans and the Rwandans and maybe the Nigerians can build those batteries too. It is cheaper there, but they have the natural resources. That's where our thinking should be. That's what the Asians do.
That's why I definitely, without any doubt, that's why we have you, Dr. Yumkella, to lead in the front after doing wonderful things out across Europe and across the world. In fact, one of the lines I heard you saying is, I will be back, which means in this situation, I want to say you will be there to encourage all the people to join you. Now, as we begin to come to a conclusion of this conversation with you, all the thing that you mentioned, for example, is the diversity of the African continent, the diversity of the youth. You're giving them hope, and you hope that they will be transformed positively. What more can you do, and what more of a strategy? Because you mentioned maybe regional organization. Nevertheless, you already identified those that are there, the ECOWAS and the SADC and others. But from the private sector, the likes of the airmen that you just mentioned, what more can be done that really motivate and encourage? 60% of unemployment in Sierra Leone and millions of youth out of school in Nigeria and other places is a dangerous precedent that we are on. What can government really do to have that political will to strengthen Africa, especially now based on what we've seen around the world?
Yeah. Well, not an easy answer. We need to do so many things at the same time. And let me put it in context. That's why I tell people, I say, when you waste 5 years of governance or 4 years of governance, you're compounding our problems because why? 10, 15 years later, the problems we should have solved 10, 15 years earlier now come and haunt us again when others are moving ahead. So in Africa, we have no time to waste. So that's why I always talk about the sense of urgency, these demographic pressures, why we cannot waste any minute in governance, just playing the usual games. So you have more power. Your ethnic group becomes dominant. You know, you're just kicking the can down the road and eventually everybody will suffer. Now we have COVID. You know, I say to people, 3 countries that should be able to handle COVID quickly should be Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Why? We had an epidemic before. And I can tell you right now, the World Bank worst case scenario and optimistic scenario for COVID spread in Africa. The optimistic scenario is Ebola in Guinea. The worst case scenario is Ebola in Sierra Leone. This was their April simulation. When I read it, I said, oh my God, my country is an example for the wrong reason. What is the point? If we had invested well during the Ebola time with all the international goodwill we had, we should have enough testing centers now because we had the bad experience, good manpower. Others should be learning from us and the Congolese and others about how do you deal with pandemics and epidemics, because we've gone through it many times. So it's building institutions and knowledge systems that will serve the test of time, not quick fixes. The same with road infrastructure, the same with governance institutions. So I believe that we in political leadership, in order to do that well, we have to sometimes put partisan politics aside. We are too loyal to parties. We are too loyal to regions. And so when any good ideas come, the first screen we look at, what does it mean for my community, my ethnic group, and my party, and then you think nation. We have to reverse it. It's nation first. So that mindset has to change, and we in leadership have to keep pushing that. The second one is consistency and willingness to keep at it. It's not easy, even me saying that. I've done 5 years here, so by the time I had all the time, it's 6 years. In another 3.5 years, I would have spent a decade now trying to do practical politics. I have tried to demonstrate to people that, look, politics is not the end all. Yeah, I can contribute here in many other ways. But can I show you the young generation? Because people have laughed at me. What is he doing in parliament? He's downgraded himself. I say, poor souls. They don't realize how important parliament is. And that's why I ran for parliament as I was running for president. I said, let me demonstrate to these guys that based on the constitution, that is the organ that should check excessive power. That is the organ that approves every major contract that comes to a country. So when you talk about corruption, it's not the executive arm alone. It is those of us who neglect our responsibility of oversight to make sure that the deals they made are in the interest of the people. Now, if you don't have the right heads in there, it will be the blind leading the blind. Nobody will check excessive executive power. And there's not a single government, whether in America or elsewhere, every government likes a lot of power, a lot of authority. You need an institution to check on them. You need an institution to do oversight. How are you spending our money? Look at you in the UK. Now they're asking Boris, we want to know how you approached COVID-19. It is not a witch hunt. They just need to know, how did you take these decisions? What can we learn from them? And how can we deal with the problem better? You may have made wrong institutions. We don't want to repeat. If our parliaments are not capable of doing the same, or you try to do it and they say, oh, he's anti-government, so you got to go keep him quiet for a little while. You need people of stature in governance for whom the state, the nation comes first. So when people laugh at me, or now they tell me he shouldn't talk much, he shouldn't be doing interviews, I say, oh my God. Around the world, they know that YUMKELLA was not only a manager of institutions or being in think tanks or raising funds for programs, he was a global advocate. And that's why, in fact, people still call me today on energy system. Now my people say, enough or they talk too much. If for keep quiet. So even if you see things wrong, you got to keep quiet, because some like the machinery, hoping they will inherit the machinery later. And it's across Africa, I see that. People love the machinery. Let's not change it too much. Let's tweak it. Or they say, if he talks too much, it means he's anti-government. No. You're helping governance when you even show government ahead of time that if you do X, Y, Z, there will be unintended consequences that will take the country back. If you do that, it is national service. People expect you, especially our politics here is bipolar. Yeah, you have to be left or right. You know, in my party, we call it Alassane or Alusine, twins. When you're a centrist and you put nation first, they call you a hypocrite, or he is too much on the fence. I say, no, I take an issue, I analyze if it is good for the nation. If that issue is proposed by government, I back it. It's constructive opposition. And if the issue is not good, I oppose. It's not because I want to obstruct, but it is too new for our politics. And people say, we're not sure he wants to be president. If he wants to be president, he has to align.
Very good. Thank you so much. Before I open the window for people to converse, I have one question here from the online. It says, what do you make of African countries doing business among themselves? It is key.
It is key. Our continent, it has the lowest proportion of intra-regional trade. And we need to enhance that. Of course, some argue that we are not counting the formal trade. Our counter argument is we need to enhance both informal trade, but hopefully more formal trade where we are part of global value chains, but you are not producing everything, you're just producing a component. Yeah, you take the Apple iPhone, components come from all over and they're assembled in China or somewhere else. They don't make all the components. So intra-Africa trade is important, and I'm very happy that with the Continental Free Trade Area, that hopefully we politicians will remove the barriers to trade and have people trade easily. When I worked in Nigeria, I used to drive from Lagos to Accra a few times. I look forward to the day where it is as easy as when I used to drive from Vienna to Berlin or Vienna to London. Yeah, that it is so easy that our trucks are moving, but more importantly, the railroads. You know, we dream of seeing that railroad that connects East African countries, so we reduce the freight costs and we become competitive. That our ports are such that, yes, the Malians or the Burkinabes can export easily either through Accra or some people say even through Sierra Leone. That we have such infrastructure, as I saw living in Central Europe, in Austria, where they were trading with the rest of the world through rail, through truck, and also by air. But some of the coastal areas in Africa can be major hubs. So I agree with the questioner. We need more intra-regional trade. I lost you on voice.
And let me quickly get Mr. Charles Iyori, who probably is an economist. And Mr. Charles, your question for Honorable YUMKELLA.
Good evening, Honorable YUMKELLA.
Hi, Charles.
We met in England during Kenke's party. You remember?
Yeah.
I think that's when you were going to go into the region. And then I also listened to one of your broadcasts in which you were taking on a lot of white men about how easy they always want to come and take minerals and food from us. Can they come into partnership? And I saw all the ashen faces looking at you. This man, you want to blow a bubble. Listen, I've always admired you. In fact, I was just telling Ben that I wrote an article and I put your name in there as someone who will say this. I think Ben will, Alistair will forward them to you later. Now, as I'm in private equity, and one of the key things I see about the market dysfunctions in Africa, you've answered most of them. One, if you don't get a legislatures right, the country, Africa cannot take off. Number one, the power of the government, the power of democracy is in legislation. So thank you for making those two moves. The other one I'm saying is that 80% of African population actually produce the food we eat. The yams, those things that you cannot mechanize. You husband them, you want to produce a yam, you really need to go to work for them. But the price stability is not there. There's volatility. So you have yam that you produced last year, you got £1 for it. The same yam this year, you're lucky to get 50p for it. Now, it hasn't reached the level of becoming a commodity exchange of futures, but there's need for us, I mean, in your constituency, to make sure that those people who make those items have a certain price guarantee. Even just to buy those items for the primary schools to eat. Because I met one of your seniors, and my question, yes, I want the African parliaments to get together into a conference and to realize that they're not just sidekicks, but they're actually the ones who set up the thing. Can we set up an African parliamentary conference?
Thank you.
Well, it is possible. Our heads of states lately have been meeting digitally There was an ECOWAS Heads of State Summit, and there was an AU digital call just a few weeks ago. I'm working on one. In fact, this morning I was just following up. I'm working on one, but of course, Alistair will already guess that it's related to energy systems. In fact, I'm working on two, one for ECOWAS and then one for the Mano River Union. I did one.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. There are a number of digital platforms we can use now. I know of one coming up very soon, end of this month, organized by the International Energy Agency for, again, discussion on energy. I am at least engaged in organizing 3 others, looking at distributive renewable energy, potentially looking at gas, and also the whole issue of clean cooking, LPG and electric cooking to save our forests and save the health of our household. Let me throw, so to agree with you that we can do all kinds. This is where I say you ride the wave. You take advantage of platforms and new innovations so that we can have dialogue amongst Africans. And a lot of what I mentioned to you is happening at the parliamentary level. This coming week, we have an IMF World Bank parliamentary discussion on COVID response. This would be my 3rd participation. There's another one, Climate Parliament, where Africans are participating. The key is when you go to these platforms, you take that knowledge home to build institutions or innovate. To just participate and talk and keep it is not going to cut it. The Asians and others go to these places, they make notes, they source material, they make contacts, they see an innovation, they meet the guy after the conference. People like me are chased after a conference. They say, you said this on the panel. Do you have 5 minutes? What did you mean by it? And you see the guy making notes, but by the way he's questioning you, you know he knows better than you, but there's just one unique aspect you said, a nuance that you gave he wants to know. So one answer to your earlier comments about yam and so on, smart subsidies must be considered. The Nigerians must accept that for decades, Nigeria has been the #1 cassava producer in the world. But Nigerians eat cassava 90% raw or semi-processed. So you tell me why Nigeria should not do like Malaysia, use oil money to subsidize cassava so they are the #1 industrializer of cassava. That's what the Thais have done. That's what the Brazilians have done. From cassava alone, you can make more than 10 or 13 products that will reduce imports of certain flours, that will make glue, that can go into textile. I know this because when I worked in Nigeria, 2000 to 2003, and decades later, have been promoting that. So smart subsidies for yam, cassava, and so on is possible. The Malaysians use Petronas money to help subsidize oil palm revolution. They industrialize it to make 30 products. Who says Nigeria cannot do that for cassava or groundnuts?
Thank you very much. I think my last one would be Mr. Mac in Italy.
Yes, sir.
Straight to the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Good evening,
Good
Doctor.
evening.
Dr. Kandeh, I follow you. I follow your interviews, your dialogues. There was this very impressive one, an interview you had in Ghana some years ago. And they are quite knowledge-based arguments. Now, my question is this. Individually, Africans do well, like you, sir. Individually, a lot of Africans are doing massively well around the world. But that is not getting us anywhere. So far, we've not made any tangible results with the individual progress. We need this collective arrangement where we can have real tangible results, successful results for Africa. How do we begin this collectively as Africans, one people, one blood, one color? How can we begin this step to collectively working together, not as Sierra Leonean, not as Nigeria, not as Gambian or South Africa. You talked of Elon Musk. Elon is South African. A lot of people don't know that. But the grandmother, I think, is Canadian. But what he did was because he saw that individually Africans are doing good, but collectively they are not doing good, and probably they'll track him down. He went to Canada to take his base. So, sir, how do we begin any sincere steps to collect?
Timing. Thank you.
Yes, well, to collective.
So I think he's coming more or less from the diaspora angle as well. Yeah. In the diaspora, maybe since Africa, you have a lot. Thank you.
Well, you can take it at many levels. You can take those guys, you guys in the diaspora, you're living in the first world. Begin to collaborate. When I give lectures in European or American institutions where there are a lot of young Africans, I pick them out in the crowd. I say, hey, make sure the guy sitting next to you is your friend. Make sure the other guy over there, black or white or African, whoever it is, that you make friends. I say, you know what, you never know. You're sitting next to the next innovator. Make friends so you can build those bridges. The Asians do it very well. Yeah? They work for a parent company in Silicon Valley. They leave the parent company, they set up a subsidiary. The parent company begins to subcontract them. Then they move back to India or somewhere else and establish another company, but they're still partnering with their American friends. So let us begin with you. So one level is you guys in the diaspora, begin to partner, do your own businesses there. Let us have some very rich, super rich Africans in the UK, US, Canada, and elsewhere, and France. So they are rich enough, they can invest back home, or they can tap into knowledge systems like how Mo Ibrahim and others are trying to do. Second, let our governments begin to encourage practical cooperation. It is one thing to deliver the speech at the AU. It's another thing to come back and say, look, yes, Nigeria and Ghana are creating a joint venture. I give you some of these examples. Nigeria and Ghana are creating a new company backed by some private sector guys on both sides who are super rich and banks. And yes, they're going to hire young Nigerians and Ghanaians to innovate together. And it is to make money. We have to understand that these ideas have to be commercially viable, to be sustainable over time. Charity is not enough. Third level is local partnerships. We're too suspicious of each other locally. You know, quickly people want to bring you down. What some of the hell some of us have faced because we decided to come home. If you don't have inner fortitude, you drop dead or you just go. Some of our folks are just bent. They look at you, they don't like you, or they don't like your achievement, or they just call you plain arrogant. Because in some of our societies, you're just supposed to play along. You're supposed to go along. And even when you ask a question, they say, aha, you see, he thinks he knows everything. My brothers, we have been trained to ask questions. We have been trained to ask questions when we don't know. Or we ask you a question so you can look at an alternative way of going. And so the too much suspicion amongst ourselves, whether it's ethnic-based or just political interest, is so much that we'd rather pull each other down and help somebody else, or just close our ears to your message. And so I gave you several levels, but of course we leaders also have to demonstrate politically that yes, I and Mr. X can disagree in politics, but we are not so disagreeable that we're enemies. In some of our countries, the moment you go have lunch with Mr. X, they say, oh, he's cross-carpeting tomorrow. No, Mr. X and I are not enemies. We just disagree sometimes on tactic or ideology, but probably we both have the same interest to make Sierra Leone great and to make it better. So there are so many levels where we have to demonstrate cooperation to get the young generation to believe that it is possible. It is the same way you see Europeans partnering across borders, and it is win-win. It is not one man or one entity running away with everything. That's why I go back to where I started, our value systems, our institutions, regulations and rules of the games we create, so that those rules and institutions will dictate certain behaviors, accountability, probity, that when we collaborate, it is not for you to snatch all my ideas and money and run with it. So at least we have to demonstrate it in many, many levels. And it is good to judge every now and again, whether digitally or face-to-face.
Thank you very much. Once again, it's indeed a pleasure to have Honorable Dr. YUMKELLA, somebody who has been with us in the Western world, former Director General of UNIDO, former CEO of international organization, after spending 2 decades plus, decided to go back home and has been at home for the last 5 years, contributing from the local to the constituency and across the nation. But apart from that, of course, it's all for the benefit and the glory of Africa. And the more people that are engaging him, hearing from him and all the like-minded, the more it will be good for us in Africa. Last line, Black Lives Matter. What do you think?
Well, it was sad to see on TV what happened. Some of my siblings and others joined the protest wherever they are around the world. I saw some of them, they sent me. It was sad what happened. It is wrong in any society. So we commiserate with those who are suffering, who are losing their lives because of injustice. We want to address injustice back home as well. We have, metaphorically speaking, knees on people's necks. That includes poverty, that includes extreme tribalism, that includes excessive use of executive power, that includes, above all, corruption that is on the necks of African youth, that is making them not excel or not inherit 10, 20 years from now better nations. So as we fight injustice elsewhere, let's turn internally and ask ourselves the hard question: are we also practicing other forms of injustice, discrimination, and so on? As a footnote, my career in the United States started in minority affairs. I rose to the rank of assistant to the dean for minority affairs. And so when I saw those images, I said, wow, I could relate to that. I used to deal with those issues in leading academic institutions in the US. So we pray that injustice anywhere is not good and can be resolved, and that all of us can examine ourselves. What kind of injustices are we also aiding and abetting in our communities or in our societies?
Thank you.
That kind of retrospection is important.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we come to the conclusion of our conversation with a distinguished African person, African child, the son of Africa. And he has shared with us extensively his vision, his mission, and of course, his belief on what we should do and how we can go about it, interacting, transforming, and having that big picture, hope for a better Africa. Once again, Honorable Dr. YUMKELLA, thank you very much for hanging around with us. Thank you for coming with us.
Thank you for having me. God bless.
So here we come, and we will end our conversation here. We say thank you once again, and bye everybody on the other line and social media.